Okay, in my previous video, we had talked about directory, the default user, and the subscription, and the relationship between all three of them. Now, the link to that particular video I'll give in the description below. In this particular chapter, we'll talk about a very important concept called resource group. So whenever you create a subscription, you have the capability of adding resource groups within that particular subscription. So what is a resource group? So basically, a resource group is a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. So here in this example, you can see that there are two resource groups, and one of these resource groups has got an SQL database, and the other resource group has got a virtual machine as well as a VNet. And these resources can be clubbed together using a resource group. So your resource group could contain anything from a web application to an SQL database to a warehousing solution. So that is based on how you cluster your resources together. Now, one of the major advantages I feel of using a resource group is that if you want to delete the entire application, you do not have to individually delete all these resources together. You can just delete the resource group and all the resources within that will get automatically deleted. So that's one of the important features of resource group where the combined resource can be clubbed together and you can do operations on all of them at one go. So let's see how you can create a resource group in Azure. Okay, so I'm back in my console. So let's create a resource group. So as you can see in this diagram that your resource group falls underneath your subscription. So what we'll do is we'll go to a subscription and then from within that subscription, we'll create a resource group. So let's do that. So let's search for subscription again. And let's open a subscription. And now what I need to do is within the subscription, I'll find something called as a resource group. So let's open this resource group. And here you can create your resource group. So as you can see that I already have 4 resource groups for this particular subscription. So let's create a new one. Let's click on create. And here you need to give a name for your resource group. So this can be based on the kind of application you're creating. Now, for example, if you want to create a web server, you can just call this as web server. And all the resources that are associated with your web server can be part of this particular resource group. So let's just call this as web server. And you also need to mention in which particular region you want your resource group to be in. So let's just choose this as East US. You can have this particular resource group in other regions as well. So let's just choose East US. You can give a tag for your resource group as well. And that's about it. So let's click on review and create. So let's click on create a resource group. And you can see that our resource group called web server has been created. So let's open this particular resource group. Okay, so currently a web server resource group does not contain any resources within it. So let's create a few resources for this particular web server. Let's click on create. And now you need to specify which particular resource you want in that resource group. So let's go to a compute and let's create a very simple virtual machine. Let's click on create here. And here you can see that it's pre-populated with the web server resource group. So let's just call this as VM and let's just create this particular resource. So let's not bother too much about all the parameters for this. Let's just create this particular resource within that resource group. Let's click on review and create. So all that I have given is just the name for this particular virtual machine. So you can see that everything is just pre-populated. So it will give you a cost related to this particular virtual machine. Let's click on create. So now let's click on download private key and create resource. And now what I've done is if you go back to the diagram, you can see that within this resource group, I have created a virtual machine. Now, similarly, you can also create other resources within this resource group. So let's wait for this virtual machine to be created. And once we have created this virtual machine, we'll delete this virtual machine, not by deleting the virtual machine directly, but by deleting the resource group itself. So let's try to do that. Okay, so currently the deployment is in process and it's creating that virtual machine. Okay, so it has created a virtual machine. So let's go back to our resource group once more. Now to go to your resource group, you can just search for resource group now. And you can just search on your resource group. And here you can just click on web server because that's the resource group that we just created. Let's click on web server. And you can see that there are 4 records. That means 4 resources got created when we created a virtual machine. So that includes the IP address, the network security group, the SSH key, and the virtual network. And similarly, it should also create the virtual machine. So now you can see that it has become 7 records. And you can also see that the virtual machine has been created along with the other resources. Now, some of the important features of the resource group includes things like your resource visualizer. So in this resource visualizer, you can see all the resources that are specific to this resource group. So here you can see all the resources and how they're interlinked with each other. So this is one cool tool that you can use. Now, apart from that, you can also click on log and you can log this particular resource group. So that's something that we'll see in the upcoming chapter. There's also something called as cost analysis. So if you want to see the cost involved for this particular resource group, you can just click on your cost analysis. Let's click on this. Now, currently, because I've just created these resources, there's no costing reported during this period. So you can use this functionality if you've run this resource group for a few days and if your resources are running for a few days. So because I've just created this particular resource group, so it's not showing any values currently. Now, apart from all these, I feel the most important functionality is this particular resource delete group. So instead of having to manually delete all these resources one by one, what you can do is you can just click on this particular delete resource group. And once I give this web server, it'll automatically delete all the resources that are within this resource group. So this is, I feel, one of the best features of a resource group. So the hard task of deleting resources one by one does not happen here. So all that I need to do is I just need to click and give the name for my web server and click on delete, and all the resources within that particular resource group will be deleted. So let's just again go back to our resource group and let's refresh this. And let's wait for this particular resource group to be deleted. And now you can see that my resource group has been deleted along with all the resources that was contained in that resource group. So that's it for resource. Please do try this at home and see how it works at your end. And if you have any issues, please get in touch with me. I'll see you in the next chapter.